Have you ever wondered what a painted animal actually meant to a hungry ancient tribe? To understand the answer, you have to leave the sunlight and step into the absolute dark. Imagine your pupils expanding violently, straining to catch even a single photon of light, but finding nothing. Your fingers trail along wet, freezing limestone just to keep your balance. The air you pull into your lungs is heavy, stale, and smells faintly of wet earth and old bone. You are not at the mouth of the cave where the tribe sleeps and cooks. You have crawled through tight, suffocating tunnels, moving further and further into the belly of the earth, leaving the safety of the surface far behind. In this pitch-black silence, the human body is entirely blind, completely vulnerable, and operating purely on a terrifying edge of survival. Then, a spark catches. A small stone bowl filled with melted animal fat flares to life, pushing back the darkness just enough to reveal a jagged stone wall. And there it is. Illuminated by the flickering, unsteady flame is a single, deep handprint pressed in bright red ochre, sitting right beside the towering image of a massive, wounded bison. This handprint is not a mistake. It is an intentional, haunting signature left in a place where no human was meant to survive. To press that hand against the cold rock, an ancient human had to gather red earth, mix it with water or saliva, fill their mouth with the metallic-tasting liquid, and blow it over their own skin. They did this in a claustrophobic chamber, knowing that the light could go out at any moment. Modern people often imagine early humans drawing on cave walls, like children sketching in a warm living room, treating these ancient spaces like prehistoric art galleries. But the physical reality of these deep caves destroys that comfortable illusion. Archaeologists analyzing these hidden chambers have found undeniable evidence of the extreme effort required to reach them. The floors of these deep tunnels are littered with carbon-dated charcoal ash, the remnants of ancient torches and fat-burning lamps carried miles away from natural light. Even more shocking are the artificial indentations carved deep into the stone walls high above the floor. These were not natural cracks. They were scaffolding holes, engineered to hold wooden beams so that human beings could climb toward the ceiling and paint in the dark. These people were not casually decorating their homes. They were mounting highly organized, dangerous expeditions into the blackness. The air inside these deep chambers often lacked enough oxygen, causing the heart to race and the mind to hallucinate. The ground was treacherous, filled with sudden drops and hidden sinkholes. More terrifying still, these lightless labyrinths were often the sleeping quarters of cave lions and massive cave bears, apex predators that could see better in the dim light and could crush a human skull with a single bite. The environment was completely hostile. Every step inward was a step away from safety, away from warmth, and away from the tribe. Yet, the people who left that red handprint and painted that giant beast deliberately chose to go into the dark. They planned it. They carried supplies, they built structures, and they did all of this during the brutally unforgiving Ice Age, a time when every single calorie of energy was the difference between waking up the next morning or freezing to death in the snow. They were desperate, they were hungry, and they were hunted. Why would starving people risk death in the dark just to draw an animal on a wall? When modern people look at ancient cave paintings, they tend to see them through the lens of modern comfort. We imagine early humans sitting around after a successful hunt, their bellies full of roasted meat, deciding to spend their free time expressing themselves. We look at the beautiful, sweeping lines of a running horse or a charging bison and think of it as ancient graffiti, or perhaps prehistoric interior design. We treat these hidden spaces like early art galleries, born out of boredom, abundant free time, or a simple desire to be creative. But this view completely ignores the terrifying reality of Ice Age survival. In a world where winter lasted for months and the landscape was locked in ice, nobody had free time. Every action, every step, every hour awake was governed by a brutal, unforgiving economy of calories. And creating that red handprint and the giant painted beast beside it was one of the most calorically expensive things a tribe could possibly do. Archaeologists exploring the deepest, darkest sections of these caves have found the discarded tools of these ancient expeditions scattered across the limestone floors. Among the charcoal and shattered bone fragments, they discovered rounded, hollowed-out stones. These were primitive lamps. In the absolute pitch black of a deep cave system, you cannot paint if you cannot see. Wood torches burn too fast, cast unpredictable shadows, and create choking smoke in unventilated tunnels. To produce a steady, clean light that would last long enough to navigate the labyrinth and paint massive figures on the ceiling, they needed a specific kind of fuel. The only fuel that worked was rendered animal fat. This is where the true cost of the paintings becomes clear, and it reveals a brutal trade-off. Animal fat was not just fuel for a stone lamp. In the freezing cold of the Paleolithic world, animal fat was the most valuable, life-saving substance on Earth. Lean meat could keep you going for a short time, but without dense, calorie-rich fat, the human body would literally starve to death, a condition researchers call rabbit starvation. A single pound of animal fat meant days of survival for a freezing child, a pregnant mother, or an exhausted hunter. Think about that trade-off. A starving tribe, shivering in the brutal winter cold, successfully hunts an animal. Every instinct, every screaming nerve in their bodies is telling them to consume every single ounce of that precious fat to stay alive, to store it as a buffer against the freezing temperatures outside. Instead, they made a terrifying sacrifice. They took chunks of that life-saving fat, scooped it into stone bowls, carried it miles underground, and set it on fire. They burned their own survival just to make a ring of light in the dark. They were quite literally burning their food to see the rock walls. This means the paintings were not a leisure activity. This was a desperate, highly calculated gamble. They were sacrificing the very calories that kept their hearts beating, risking starvation for the sake of an image. If this was not art for fun, and it cost them their food, what was the actual purpose of the painted beast? To understand why they gave up their precious fat to paint in the dark, you first have to understand what hunger meant in the Ice Age. Modern people experience hunger as a mild discomfort, a grumbling stomach before lunch. In the Paleolithic winter, an empty stomach was a countdown clock to death. When the temperature drops well below freezing and the wind cuts through animal hides, the human body burns through its reserves at a terrifying speed, just to keep internal organs functioning. If a hunter did not find dense calories, the body would start to cannibalize itself. Muscle tissue would deteriorate, joints would ache with a dull, heavy pain. The hands gripping a wooden spear would begin to shake not just from the bitter cold, but from sheer neurological exhaustion. A single failed hunt did not mean going to bed hungry. It meant the children in the tribe would grow lethargic and silent, and the elderly would simply not wake up the next morning. This was the pressure resting on the shoulders of the ancient hunters. Now, look at what they had to kill to survive. They were not tracking docile deer through a mild forest. The ancient landscape was ruled by megafauna. A steppe bison weighed over 2,000 pounds, with a thick matted hide that acted like natural armor and horns the size of human arms. Wild horses, woolly rhinos, and massive aurochs roamed the frozen steppes. These animals were mountains of pure, volatile muscle. Compare that to the fragile anatomy of a human being. We have no scales, no thick fur, and no natural armor. Our skin tears easily. Our flat teeth are useless for defense. A grazing strike from a charging bison horn would rip open a human torso like a wet leaf. A single panicked kick from a wild horse could shatter a hunter femur. And in a world without hospitals or antibiotics, a broken leg was a slow, agonizing death sentence. Hunting these giants was not a sport or a grand adventure. It was a deeply traumatic, terrifying physical confrontation. Imagine standing in the freezing snow, feeling your own desperate hunger, and watching a beast 10 times your size turn and lock its eyes on you. As the animal lowers its head and the ground begins to vibrate under its hooves, the human nervous system reacts violently. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream. The heart beats so rapidly that vision, tunnels, and breath becomes shallow. The biological instinct built into every human cell is screaming at you to drop your weapon and run for your life. But if the hunter ran, the tribe would die. They had to stand their ground. They had to override the most basic survival instinct of self-preservation in order to kill. How do you convince a starving, freezing, terrified human being to walk directly toward a monster? A wooden shaft tipped with a chipped piece of flint was the only physical weapon they had, but it was not enough to conquer the panic in their own heads. To kill an animal 10 times their size, they needed a tool sharper than stone. They needed a shared mind. When you look at the towering images of bison and horses painted on the ceilings of deep cave systems, you have to ask a physical question. How did they get up there? The ceilings in places like Lascaux and Altamira are often 10 to 15 feet above the rocky floor. A human being standing on their tiptoes, holding a flickering stone lamp, could not possibly reach high enough to draw these massive, perfectly proportioned beasts. Modern people assume that ancient hunters were primitive, living moment to moment in a state of disorganized panic. But the physical evidence left inside the rock proves that these ancient humans were survival engineers. When archaeologists carefully examined the limestone walls beneath the highest paintings, they found something shocking. Carved directly into the rock were unnatural, perfectly spaced indentations. These were not cracks caused by water or time. They were sockets. The ancient humans who crawled into these lightless chambers dragged heavy, cut wooden beams through the narrow, suffocating tunnels. They locked these beams into the stone walls to create platforms. They built scaffolding in the pitch black. Imagine the sheer logistical effort required for this. You are deep underground, breathing stale air. Below you, someone is holding a shallow stone bowl filled with burning animal fat, providing the only circle of light in a lightless world. Above them, another human is balancing on a wooden plank suspended over jagged rocks, reaching up toward the ceiling. They are not simply smearing mud on the wall. They are applying complex chemistry. Analysis of the pigments shows that these ancient people mined specific minerals like hematite and manganese, sometimes traveling for miles on the freezing surface just to find the right colors. They did not just use the raw stone. They heated the minerals in surface fires to chemically alter the pigments, creating richer reds and deeper blacks. They crushed the rocks into fine powders and mixed them with animal blood, plant juices, or saliva to create binders that would permanently adhere to the damp limestone. They fashioned brushes out of animal hair and twigs. They hollowed out the delicate bones of birds to create primitive airbrushes, blowing the metallic-tasting liquid over their hands to leave that haunting red handprint on the wall. This level of complexity changes everything we understand about the people who painted the animals. This was not the work of a single, lonely hunter hiding from the cold. This was a massive, highly organized operation. One person cannot gather the wood, build the scaffolding, mine the pigment, mix the chemicals, hold the burning fat lamp, and paint the ceiling all alone. It required a team. It required division of labor. It meant the entire tribe agreed that this dangerous, calorically expensive project was absolutely necessary. While half the tribe was on the surface, risking their lives in the snow to find enough meat to keep everyone from starving, the other half was underground, burning the precious fat the hunters brought back, risking falls and predator attacks to paint the walls. They deliberately diverted their most valuable resources away from immediate physical survival. They engineered these massive, hidden spaces for a specific reason. The cave was not an art gallery. It was a machine. If you look closely at the massive animals painted on the ceilings of caves like Lascaux or Neo, you will notice a disturbing physical detail. The beasts are not just standing peacefully in a prehistoric landscape. Many of them are drawn with straight, sharp lines intersecting their bodies. Some of these lines resemble spears entering the flank or the chest. In other cave systems, archaeologists have found faint, aggressive cut marks carved directly into the limestone, striking the painted animals right over their vital organs. These ancient humans were not just admiring the megafauna. They were attacking the images. This detail unlocks the psychological purpose of the deep caves. These chambers were not simply places of worship or primitive art galleries. Evidence suggests they were prehistoric survival simulators. Think about the biological terror of hunting a wild steppe bison. You are holding a wooden spear. The animal is a mountain of volatile muscle with horns that can split a tree. You cannot practice this hunt in the real world. A single mistake during a practice run means a shattered spine or a punctured lung. Furthermore, you cannot train a young, terrified hunter by simply telling him what to do while sitting safely around a surface fire. The human nervous system does not learn to conquer primal panic through conversation. The brain has to experience the monster. The deep cave provided the perfect environment to hack the human mind. By bringing the hunters deep underground into a completely sensory-deprived chamber, the tribe removed all daily distractions. There was no wind, no blinding snow, no crying children, and no shifting daylight. There was only the freezing stone, the heavy, crushing darkness, and the giant painted beast illuminated by the flickering light of a burning fat lamp. In this intensely focused environment, they could look directly at the monster they were going to face the next day. They could trace the massive shoulders. They could point to the exact spot where the spear had to penetrate to hit the lungs. The red handprint pressed into the stone beside the animal was a crucial part of this mental engineering. It was a permanent, physical assertion of human presence. In a world where humans were small, fragile, and constantly hunted, leaving a handprint next to a towering beast was a psychological anchor. It proved to the shivering hunters standing in the dark that a human being could exist right beside the monster and survive. It was a way of claiming power in a terrifying, uncontrollable world. By standing in the dark and rehearsing the kill on the painted wall, these survival engineers were actively rewiring their own panic responses. They were forcing their heart rates to stabilize while looking at the shape of the predator. They were building mental fortitude, so that when they finally crawled out of the cave, walked into the blinding snow, and tracked the real, breathing bison, they were not facing an unknown terror. They had already confronted the beast in the dark. They had already killed it in their minds. This psychological preparation was a brilliant adaptation, turning a cold stone wall into a weapon of survival. But a static drawing, no matter how large or perfectly proportioned, can only do so much to convince a terrified human brain. For the simulator to truly work, for the ancient nervous system to be completely reprogrammed, simply staring at an image was not enough. The beast on the wall had to come alive. For a terrified human brain to truly rewrite its own survival instincts, it has to be tricked. It has to believe the danger is real. The deep caves provided a sensory environment so extreme that it naturally hacked the human nervous system. When you descend hundreds of feet below the surface, the air changes. It becomes heavy, stale, and thin. The oxygen levels drop, causing mild hypoxia. This lack of oxygen makes the heart beat faster, the skin flush, and the mind enter a natural state of altered consciousness. Hallucinations in this environment are common. Now, introduce a single, unstable source of light into that deprived mind. Modern people are used to the steady, clean glow of electricity. We look at photographs of cave paintings brightly lit by camera flashes, and the animals look completely flat and static. But the ancient hunters did not have halogen lights. They had a hollowed-out stone filled with melted animal fat and a crude, smoking wick. The light from a fat lamp does not hold still. It flickers violently, sputtering and casting deep, dancing shadows against the jagged, uneven texture of the limestone. This is where the ancient humans engineered something truly astonishing. When researchers carefully examined the massive beasts painted on the ceilings of caves like Chauvet, they noticed a strange anatomical detail. Many of the animals are drawn with too many legs. A running bison might have 8 legs instead of 4. A rhinoceros is painted with multiple overlapping heads and horns. For decades, modern observers thought this was a mistake, assuming primitive people simply did not understand perspective or were lazily drawing over older work. But that assumption was wrong. When you stand in that oxygen-deprived darkness and hold a flickering fat lamp up to those overlapping lines, the image suddenly transforms. As the flame jumps and shifts, different sets of painted legs catch the light while others fall into deep shadow. The optical illusion is immediate and terrifying. The animal appears to move. It looks like it is running rapidly across the stone. Furthermore, the painters deliberately placed the animals over the natural bulges and curves of the rock wall. When the unstable light hits these curves, the painted chest of the beast looks like it is heaving with heavy breath. The ancient hunters had accidentally invented the world's first animation, tens of thousands of years before modern cinema. Combine this visual trick with the terrifying acoustics of the deep cave. Sound behaves wildly underground. A single footstep, a heavy breath, or a chanted rhythm echoes through the tight tunnels, amplifying into a low, rumbling roar that sounds exactly like a stampeding herd. To the shivering hunters standing in the dark, staring at a giant beast that appeared to be charging across the wall, the experience was not like looking at a piece of art. It was a visceral, overwhelming encounter. The monster was alive in the room with them. This is the moment that solitary red handprint takes on its full, terrifying weight. Imagine a hunter, trembling in the cold, hypoxic air, stepping forward to press their hand right beside this moving, breathing nightmare. Leaving that red ochre print was not an artist signing their work. It was a psychological pact. It was a way of standing face to face with the very thing that could rip them apart and proving to the tribe and to themselves that they could hold their ground. By surviving this terrifying simulation, the hunters left the cave with their nervous systems fundamentally altered. They had mastered their panic. They were ready to walk into the blinding snow and face the real herd. But this intense, shared experience in the dark did more than just prepare them for tomorrow's hunt. It accidentally changed the trajectory of our species. When the ancient hunters finally crawled back out of the lightless labyrinth, leaving the flickering fat lamps and the painted walls behind, they stepped into the freezing air as a different kind of human. The ritual in the dark had done more than calm their racing hearts. It had solved the greatest survival problem our species ever faced, and it had nothing to do with sharpening stones. It had to do with trust. For most of early human history, people lived in very small, fractured family units. A handful of shivering adults and children could scavenge, catch small game, and perhaps take down a weak animal. But a small family group cannot hunt a herd of woolly rhinos. They cannot force a stampede of 2,000-pound wild horses. Taking down Ice Age megafauna required dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people working in perfect, terrifying synchronization. How do you convince 50 starving, desperate individuals who naturally view strangers as a threat to risk their lives for a coordinated plan? In a brutal world where stealing someone else's food was often the easiest way to survive, trust was a dangerous liability. But if those same 50 people had crawled into the earth together, if they had stood shoulder to shoulder in the suffocating dark, breathing the same stale air and watching the same painted bull heave its chest in the jumping light, everything changed. They were no longer just hungry humans fighting over scraps of bone marrow. They had shared a hallucination. They had looked at a concept, a shared symbol of the hunt, and they had all placed their hands on the wall in an unspoken pact. This shared imagination is what allowed ancient humans to scale their survival. Because they could stand in a dark room and believe in the power of the exact same painted beast, they could organize and trust each other enough to trap the real beast. The physical evidence of this trust is scattered across the prehistoric landscape. Archaeologists have found massive kill sites at the bottom of cliffs, places where ancient humans successfully drove entire herds of bison or horses over the edge to their deaths. You cannot execute a cliff drive with 5 people. It requires a vast, perfectly coordinated funnel of shouting humans stretching for miles, waving animal hides, passing signals, and trusting that the people at the edge will not break the line. The cave was the psychological glue that made this massive cooperation possible. It was the birth of shared belief. For the first time, humans were united by a story that existed only in their minds, validated by the red handprints left in the deep earth. Before this, they were just families reacting to the cold. After this, they were a society. The physical meat they pulled from those massive hunts fed their starving bodies, but the shared fiction of the painted beast built the modern world. You might think that the world of the deep cave is entirely gone, buried under thousands of years of human progress, agriculture, and concrete. You wake up in a warm bed, you walk into a room flooded with electric light, and you buy your food wrapped in sterile plastic from a brightly lit supermarket. You have never had to calculate the exact caloric cost of building a fire. You have never had to stare at a 2,000-pound beast in the freezing snow and convince your shaking legs not to run away. Modern humans like to believe we have evolved far past the shivering people who blew red ochre onto wet limestone walls. But your nervous system tells a completely different story. The ancient mind is still operating perfectly inside your head. Think about what you do when you want to safely experience fear, triumph, or adrenaline. You leave the bright, safe reality of the daytime world. You walk into a completely darkened room. You sit quietly with a large group of strangers, all facing the exact same direction. And then you look up at a massive, glowing wall where giant, moving images flicker in the dark. As you watch those images, your heart rate accelerates, your breathing becomes shallow, your palms might sweat as you watch a simulated threat unfold in front of you. You are sitting in a soft, comfortable chair, completely safe from physical harm, but your biological hardware is reacting exactly as if the danger were real. The modern movie theater is just a high-tech version of the deep limestone cave. We are still retreating into the dark, using flickering light to hack our own survival instincts, processing our primal fears through a shared illusion. We still crave the psychological simulator. We still need to look at the monsters from a safe distance. The only difference is that our walls are made of pixels instead of cold stone, and our light comes from electricity instead of burning animal fat. But underneath that thin layer of modern technology, you are running the exact same biological software as the survival engineers of the Ice Age. When you understand this, the ancient world stops feeling distant. It is sitting right beneath your skin. The people who crawled into the earth were not primitive, mindless creatures scratching in the dirt. They were brilliant, desperate survivors who figured out how to conquer the terrifying vulnerability of the human mind. They realized that before you can kill a monster in the physical world, you have to conquer it in your imagination. So the next time you find yourself staring at a glowing screen in a dark room, feeling your pulse rise at an image that is not actually there, remember where that instinct came from. Remember the crushing, hypoxic dark of the Paleolithic Earth. Remember the terrible cost of burning your own food just to push back the shadows. And picture that single, deep handprint pressed in bright red ochre beside a towering, wounded beast. It is still there, deep underground, sealed in the pitch black. Civilization is just a comfortable story we built in the sunlight. Your ancestors are not gone, they are still inside the way you sit in the dark and watch the shadows move.